Welcome back to 100 Days of Coding with Derrick Redeemer. This is day 22 of our 100 Days of Coding journey. In our previous lesson, we learned about the div element and discovered that it is used to group sections of a web page. So we learned something like this one. This is the opening tag, and this is what the closing tag. Today, we are going to learn about another very important HTML element. That's the span element. The span element. We are going to learn this one here. So this one, we are going to learn this one. So at first glance, div and span may seem similar because they are both container elements. However, they have different purposes, and understanding the difference will make your HTML much better. So let's begin. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain what a span element is, create a span element, understand the difference between span and a div element, know when to use span instead of div element. Before you start, imagine your teacher writes this sentence on a board. I love learning HTML. So something like this. HTML. Your teacher writes this thing on the board. I love learning HTML. This particular one here. All right. Now, imagine the teacher wants to highlight only the word HTML using a different color. So this particular one here, this HTML using what? A different color. The teacher doesn't need to write the whole sentence. Only that one word needs to stand out. That's what the HTML needs to stand out. That is exactly where the span element becomes useful. Now, someone might ask, what is the span element? Simply put, the span element is an inline container used to group or target a small portion of text or other inline elements. Unlike the div element, a span does not start on a new line. So span does not start on a new line. It stays on the same line as the surrounding text. So for example, this particular one here. So span, I'm going to use span here. Then you open the browser to see. Now let's the syntax, as the syntax goes. The syntax, we know that the syntax should be what? The span. This one is the tag for the what? For the span. Anything placed between the opening and the closing tags belongs to that a particular element. Particular tag. So this particular one here, if I write anything, so let's say HTML, or I type anything that I type between the two belongs to that tag. Okay. So for example, let's say I love coding. Yes, or let's use this one. So let's use this one, span. Let's open our web browser to see. So when you open this browser, you can see that when you open the browser, it looks like what? Just a normal sentence. You won't notice any difference yet because span does not change the appearance by itself. Later, when we learn CSS, we'll use span to style only the word inside it. All right. So suppose you have this sentence. Welcome to Derrick's coding class. If you want only the word coding to appear in blue or bold, you can wrap it inside a span. So for example, so something like this. So let's say paragraph. Welcome to Derrick's coding class. So welcome. Then I want to span this particular one, the coding. I want the coding to stand. So that's what span. Sorry. All right. So the span here identifies only the coding for future styling. So this one, the styling we are going to use for CSS to do that. So this particular one here, you see that it will never change in the web browser. It will not change in the web browser. If you open the web browser, it will not change. So you can see it will not change because there's no CSS added to that particular one there. Right. So now let's look at the span versus div. The difference between span and a div. This is the most important part of today's lesson. So div groups large section of web page. Div starts on a new line. Div used for block level content, while span groups for small pieces of text. It also stays on the same line, that's inline, then used for inline content. Now, easy way to understand this particular one here. Easy way to understand this one, or easy way to remember this one. Think of a div as a room in a house. A room holds many things like furniture, a bed, a wardrobe, and a table. Yes, a table. Now think of a span as a label on one drawer inside that room. The room is large. The label is small. That is the difference. That's the difference between the div and the span. So yeah, let's look at. We can also look at some examples using the span as well. So for example, this particular one, I said I love coding, and I've used span for the HTML. Sorry, I love learning HTML. Then welcome to Derrick's coding class. where I span what the coding class. I can make this one what stand out using bold, italic, or underline it as well. Okay, and let's combine the div and the span. So here we are going to see how both elements can work together. We're going to see how both elements can work together. So for example, I'm going to create a div. So division, let's say the H. So I'm going to create heading, let's say about me. So about me. So I'm using the file we created in the previous video where we see paragraph. So let's say paragraph, my name is Derrick. Then I span the Derrick. So P paragraph. So I'm going to span what? The Derrick. So span Derrick. My name is Derrick. All right. So now what happened? What's this happening? The div groups what the entire section. This div here, this what groups the entire section. The span identifies only what? Only Derrick inside what? Inside the div. And yeah, this is how developers commonly use them together. Now, where someone might ask, where is span used? You will often see span used for highlighting important words, styling parts of a sentence, changing the color of one word, making one word bold or different from the rest. You will average its full power once we begin learning CSS. So don't worry, as we'll start CSS soon, you will see how the span works. So imagine reading a book, someone gives you a highlighter, right? You didn't highlight the entire page. You only highlight the important words or underline the important words with your pencil. That is exactly what span does. It targets a small part instead of the whole section. Now let's look at some common mistakes we make. We're going to look at some common mistakes we make. So mistake 1, using span to organize an entire web page. You sometimes use span to organize an entire web page. It will look messy. Use div for large sections. Mistake 2, using div when you only want to target one word. A span is better for that one. It's a better choice. Then we expect our span to change the appearance automatically. It won't. You will style it later out using CSS. If you are expecting the span to change appearance automatically, it's a lie. It will not change. That is done using the CSS. Now you're going to create a mini project here. You create a web page with a heading, 2 paragraphs. Inside each paragraph, wrap one important word inside the span element. Open the page in your browser and observe that the text still appears on the same line. All right. Today we learn what a span element is, how to create span element, the difference between div and span, when to use span, how div and span work together. Excellent work. Today you have learned about the span element and how it differs from the div elements. Remember, use div to group large section of a web page. Use span to target small pieces of text within a line. That's the inline. These two elements are among the most frequently used HTML elements, especially when we begin starting our web page with CSS. In the 23, we will learn about HTML semantic elements and discover how they help us build well-structured and meaningful web page. Thank you for joining the 22 of 100 days of coding with Derrick Redeemer. Keep learning, keep practicing, and keep coding. I'll see you in the 23. Happy coding.